Hello. So thank you for being here and to have a conversation about what men can do to end violence against women. And should we start with you introducing yourself, Jolovan? Would you like to tell us a little bit about what you do?
Okay, my name is Jolovan Wham. I'm a social worker with Home. Home is the humanitarian organization for migration economics. So we are an NGO that looks into the rights and welfare of migrant workers. So we work with the domestic worker community to provide social support services for them and also to advocate on issues which concern them, issues relating to their working conditions, to their welfare, their safety, and we provide shelters for women migrant workers who are victims of abuse and exploitation, and those who are also victims of trafficking and forced labor.
Right, so I'm Sean Francis. I'm the marketing officer at Project X, which is an organization that deals with sex workers' rights. So, as marketing officer, one of the things that I handle is coming up with and initiating campaigns like the one that we did a few months ago called Boys to Bullies, and that was a campaign about calling out this cultural practice among secondary school children. Where we saw these secondary school kids going down to places like Changi Village, just to look for transgender people, look for sex workers, and harass them either verbally or physically. So we wanted to get that out in the public domain. I also work on responding to cases and documenting cases of human rights abuse. We go down to the red light districts in Singapore, and we try to find out what's going on the ground. We document it for reports, and also we try to respond as quickly as I can. So that could be anything from information, getting AFA down, or responding in whatever way that we can. Yeah.
So this is responding to cases, incidents where sex workers face abuse.
Yep.
Hey, I'm Benny Bong. I work as a family and marital therapist. So part of my work involves helping couples who are in relationships where there's been domestic violence. Sometimes it's to try to help them resolve the difficulties without it turning violent. And sometimes in some situations it may be to advise individuals to leave those relationships where it's become very dangerous for them. Part of my work also involves training of professionals, social workers, counselors, on how they can also continue to do this service. The other hat that I wear is a voluntary hat with the Society Against Family Violence. And one of the projects that we have done over the years has been to look at the incidence of violence in our little island. Unfortunately, it's not all calm and peaceful. About 10% of women who were surveyed reported that they experienced directly violence of a physical and sometimes of a sexual nature.
And this is a study of that particular figure was of male violence, right?
It was primarily violence experienced by women in the hands of their male partners, whether existing or previous partners.
Could you share some insights from that survey that you found particularly important to focus on?
Well, the survey opened up some surprises for us. We did expect to see violence that is of a higher nature with low income, with individuals with less education, and we saw that. So in the rental flats, in the one-room flats, we saw a high incidence. But what surprised us was that there was not just a downward trend. We saw actually a U-shaped kind of a graph. So the higher the education, there seemed to be an increase in the violence. The more the household income was, there was also an increase in violence. So that sort of challenged our idea that violence is just something that couples or families with low income or no education would experience.
Right. And how did you come to doing the work that you do?
Oh, it was really a point of embarrassment. I was working in a counseling agency, and a colleague of mine who was working with us from India, he said, "So, do you see clients who experience domestic violence?" And this was about 25 years ago. So at the tip of my tongue, I wanted to say no. But I paused and I thought, well, I do see women who are depressed. I do see women who are suicidal. And then I thought to myself, oh, why are they depressed and suicidal? Because they were living with a violent partner. So I found myself saying yes. And then his next question was, so what do you do for these women? And again, I realized that whatever answer I was going to give was totally inadequate. We tried to counsel them to be less provocative to their husbands, to be more tolerant of his violent behavior. And that was not the right thing to say to victims of violence. And so that was my moment of epiphany to wake up and to say that something more should be done.
So what's the approach now? If it's not to say, modify the victim's behavior.
Well, now we take a more systemic view, meaning that we look at it as a relationship between a perpetrator and a victim of violence. And in some situations, that dynamic has to end. In some situations where the parties, for whatever reason, choose to stay, want to stay, and they choose to stay not because they have no choice, but maybe because of a loving relationship or whatever may be the case. Then we look at how can this violent cycle end, and we look at what both parties can do.
Jolovan, how did you come to doing the work you do?
Okay. It's quite personal actually because my family used to hire and still hires actually live-in domestic workers. So as a child, I grew up with live-in domestic workers, and that gave me an insight into the kinds of problems and challenges that they face. Because I used to, my parents used to put me together in the same room when I was a child to sleep with my domestic worker. So I used to talk to her a lot. So that gave me a very good insight into some of the difficulties that she faced. And also, I was very chatty as a child, so I used to talk a lot to her at night and prevented her from going to sleep. So when I think about it now, how terrible that might have felt for her, because not only did she have to do a lot of work during the day, by the night she also had to entertain this spoiled brat that was just prattling away at night. So, and subsequently, when my parents started to hire other domestic workers, and we would have discussions about their rights and how they should be treated, I became very concerned with one particular incident which happened, which is when my mom decided to allow our live-in domestic worker, at the time she was an Indonesian domestic worker, allow her to go out on a weekly day off. And then her friends started to scold her and say, why are you doing that? If you allow her to go out for her day off, she's going to have a Bangladeshi boyfriend, she's going to get pregnant, and she's going to learn all kinds of bad things, and worst of all, she's going to gossip to all the other domestic workers and insist, and then all the other domestic workers will start insisting on having their weekly days off too. So when I thought about that at the time as a child, I was very disturbed because I didn't want to go to school every day, so why did I expect our live-in domestic worker to want to work for us every single day? So I also heard stories from my mom about agencies who were violent towards the domestic workers. There was one story she told of an agent who threatened to throw a chair at a domestic worker. So these kinds of stories really sensitized me to the plight of these women. So that made me want to do something about the situation. So that was how I got involved.
Great. Sean, how did you come to doing what you do?
Mine is a lousy story. Frankly, I think the more interesting story is why I stayed. Why I got into the work that I do really was because I just graduated and I felt like I wanted to do something meaningful. So I just looked up all the civil society groups and I just wanted to see which cause was the most behind. And so I just looked all the way down, okay, sex workers' rights. I mean that's something that nobody hears about. So I was like, okay, yes, I'm going to pick that because it seems like they're not they haven't progressed as much and they could use more stuff. So I went there. So it was a lousy reason to join, so to speak. But why I stayed, I think was stronger for me in the sense that I was barely a week or two into volunteering that I saw the first case of violence. You know, and then a month in, there was this big case that TOC reported as well about men who were going down to the red light districts and paying the girls with counterfeit notes and making money off of them. So they would pay the girls with these counterfeit notes, have the services, enjoy the services, and they would actually take back change from the girls. So the girls were actually losing money. So when you see it with your own eyes, that hits you. And then you start to realize, okay, it's not just because I sat down with a list and said this we use motel. It's because these are real human beings that I smoke with, that I have dinner with, and then suddenly the next day they're coming in with all these stories. I've just been abused. I've just been sexually harassed. So that's what kept me there, and that's what keeps me doing the work that I do. Yeah.
So you all work with women who are particularly vulnerable in different ways, right? Whether they're vulnerable within, because when you were sharing that many of some of the clients you see are also vulnerable because of their immigrant status compared to their husbands who are Singaporeans, or women who are vulnerable because they're domestic workers or sex workers. So, is there something you'd like to? Is there overlap in the work that you do? Is it something that you think we need to pay particular attention to?
I think because there's this common trend of it seems that there's a perverse nature in humankind, unfortunately in mankind, to take advantage of those who are the weaker. And here it could be the weaker gender, the person who is more disenfranchised, more disempowered. There seems to be that nature in us, that perverse nature that they want to take advantage of. So I think we need to speak with one voice about why should that be. You know, if we do have a position of advantage or strength, can we not use that in a more positive and a more constructive manner? It's not an opportunity to exploit.
Right. Right. Could you share a little bit about the dynamic you see with the women in the situations and immigrant women, and what are the other levels you need to consider in a situation?
Well, if she's coming in as a foreign bride, one first thing that hits her is that it's a strange place, it's a new country. Sometimes it holds a lot of promise for maybe advancement for herself or for her children later on. But it's a new environment. She doesn't have her support system. She doesn't understand how things work. How is one supposed to get help? She's not aware of her rights as a person. And sometimes she's basically told of her lack of rights. If your husband does not sponsor you, you can be deported. You will be deported. If you have children from this Singaporean husband and they are born here, they are citizens automatically. And if you are deported, you would lose the children. So immediately there are a lot of positions where she's really in a marginalized position. If she were to seek for employment and if she's not able to carry a professional qualification, then she's not going to get jobs so easily.
Right.
And she's going to be very dependent on her husband for her daily sustenance. So it's a very, one-sided relationship that we see.
In terms of the power, right?
The power
and do you see, where their partners, men use that against them to, and that is one of the reasons for the violence? Because, like for example, I've heard of situations where, the husbands might say, you have to, whether it's you have to have sex with me, or you have to do this, or you have to do that, because if you don't listen to what I say, I can cancel my
Sure,
friends.
sure. I mean, it's a very accessible tool or lever that they use. And sadly, with the fact that these women are very dependent on the husbands take the position where they have a sense of entitlement. Because I married you, because I took you out of a village, because I provide for you, I'm entitled to have you in whatever way I want.
And I think earlier when we were talking with Jolovan, when you shared how so much of the abuse you see, whether it's against wives, like women by their partners, or whether it's against domestic workers, you said there's a sense of wanting to control the woman, right? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I go back to the example of the fact that some husbands feel that they have that sense of entitlement because they have brought in this person, they've taken care, provided for, um, and when they see these individuals becoming stronger, maybe becoming friendly with the neighbors, learning how to speak the language, maybe being able to even get some form of part-time employment. Some of these men actually feel very afraid, very vulnerable, that at some point in time, these individuals might then be strong enough to say, why should I live under these circumstances? Who would want to live under these circumstances? And that's where some of these men go and exercise very harsh forms of control to prevent her movement, to prevent her sense of a sense of self that's being formed in her.
Right. Jolene, do you have something to add to that?
Yes, I think that sense of entitlement is something which we see a lot when it comes to abuses against domestic workers. And it's often motivated by class and gender, class superiority and gender superiority. So, because domestic workers are socialized to be subservient, so employers and agencies encourage them to say things like yes ma'am, no ma'am, and to always take instructions without asserting themselves. They're not allowed to have a point of view. They're not allowed to say no. So this empowers them and makes it more difficult to resist physical, verbal, and sexual abuse when it happens. And many of them are also economically dependent on their employers. And when they come into Singapore to work, they usually have to pay the first 6 to 8 months of their salaries to an agent. So they are already indebted. So they're especially vulnerable during this period. And they also have their mobile phones taken from them. And they're not allowed to go out. They don't have days off. So they are in effect cut off from the outside world. So you can imagine how that makes them so extremely vulnerable to any kind of violence that could happen in the house.
So if we were to sort of shift the conversation slightly, but on a related note to, this question of male violence, right? And I think specifically, whether it's the violence that a client might perpetrate against a sex worker or a husband might perpetrate against his wife, is there this sense of, like people often think of violence and men's violence as an anger management issue, right? And what would you say to that? Is it an issue of anger and of what is it? Why does it happen?
I think sadly, when we think of the stereotypical man, not very expressive, not very communicative, not very even in touch with his own emotions, but about the only emotion that he's permitted to have, and if he has, we say, well, he's a guy, is the emotion of anger. So when a man feels ashamed, when he feels vulnerable, when he feels afraid, sadly sometimes it is surfaced as anger. And so then the man doesn't know how to express his feelings beyond that of being angry. But there's another dimension to men and anger. And that when men feel that they are angry, they feel that it has to be expressed only in one way, through aggression, through violent action. We get angry all the time. We get angry with our bosses, we get angry with sometimes a police officer. But we don't allow ourselves to express our anger in going out and hitting our boss. I mean, not many men that I think of will do that. So it seems like in some situations, these men are able to manage this anger, but in other situations, and that I think is really some of the messaging that goes in to say, so when you're angry, you lash out, and you can lash out with your wife because, that's within the family, that's okay. You love her, so, you can do that.
So that's more socially acceptable.
That's socially acceptable, and sometimes maybe even the media seems to kind of propagate that message that, when a man gets angry, he hits his wife. Well, that unfortunately is not the right messaging.
So what is it like to be a man advocating for, who cares about and is trying to talk to people about violence that women face, like whether it's domestic worker abuse or sex work abuse. So how do you see your role, and how is it different because you're a man?
I think I have, I see my role as being somebody with a unique perspective. Um, and this is with reference to the Voice the Police campaign. All the girls there, and Vanessa, uh, they'd all known about this cultural phenomenon, this cultural practice. Guys from secondary schools going down, and they'd all been, victims of this form of harassment.
So this
And
is,
so
just to clarify, this is specifically secondary school boys going down to areas where transgender sex workers work to
yes,
heckle
and they will
harass them.
heckle, harass,
Right.
even beat them up sometimes. Okay, so they all have experienced that. But I came from a school where I was actually part of that. So I was able to stand on the side of the perpetrator and give them that perspective. And I think that's partially why we were able to craft the Our Voice the Police campaign. It's because I, as a man, had been in the role of a perpetrator, and I knew what was going through their minds. So men really have this unique opportunity to be allies to women in ways that you could never imagine. You have that perspective. Yeah.
So could you tell us a little bit more about the campaign and what is it trying to do?
So yeah, the campaign was really we wanted to kind of do two things. We wanted to firstly call out the practice because we all know it exists, but nobody's ever really spoken out about it. Nobody's ever condemned it and say, hey, this is really really wrong. This is detrimental as hell, and the second thing we wanted to do was really try to understand what were the societal forces, what are the institutional forces that are allowing this thing to continue on for years and years and years. So one very interesting thing that I managed to pull off, also, like I said, because of my position as a guy, is just call up guy friends who I knew had partaken in this and say, hey, a couple of years back, I heard you went down to Changi to go and harass the sex workers. Can you tell me about it? And they just spoke, They were like, yeah, I went down, I scolded them, I hit them, oh, no problem, man, So they could speak really, really freely with me. One of them even going so far as to say, hey, I felt like I have a moral imperative to go down and hit them and teach them to be your own gender. So, you have that. I felt like I was gifted with that opportunity. Yeah.
And what are some of the, you said, gave you insights into why this happens, right?
Yes.
So what are some of the things you understood about why boys do this?
So we looked at two things to try to understand why any human being would want to do this to another human being. So we looked at academic sources, and they talked about schoolyard culture. They talked about things like masculinity, testosterone, and about hierarchies and things like that. The second thing we did also was to talk to the boys themselves to get insight. That was the thing that I found most interesting because they were telling us things like one of them said he felt he had a moral imperative too. Other people were a little bit more self-reflective. They had come out of the system, they graduated, and now they would be 20-something years old, and they look back and they said, yeah, actually, why did I do that? That was pretty wrong. That was not a good thing. And then there were others still who were saying, it's not a big thing. The sex workers probably know that it's part of the job. So you almost have this sort of, you on one hand have people who take a moral stance to bully and harass sex workers, and on the other hand you have people who kind of try to normalize it in a way. They try to say things like, the girls don't mind it, they know it's part of their job. Or, they try to bring in morals, ethics, whatever they can to try to normalize it, or they say, oh, everyone does it, so it's okay. Yeah, that's the scary bit. Yeah.
And the people who are more reflective, like what did they, from their point of view, what makes this happen? Like, what is it about? You referred to schoolyard culture. Like,
Yeah.
what is that?
So yeah, it was really interesting because you read it in an academic source talking about schoolyard culture, and then you literally have a live example with you talking about exactly what this professor in the US is talking about. So schoolyard culture is basically this thing where you have certain guys who embody characteristics that people consider cool or manly, and these people rise up the hierarchy of the schoolyard. And what you then see is a lot of other boys trying to emulate this person. So everybody then wants to kind of follow him and the things that he does. Now, the way this is reflected then in Singapore schoolyard culture with respect to this phenomenon of bullying is that one guy, and this is what I found out from the guy interview, you would have one guy in 2002 go down to Changi and he would harass a sex worker. In 2003, you would have another guy come back and say, I hit a sex worker. In 2004, it'll be I gang raped a sex worker. It gets up, it gets higher and higher and higher because of this hierarchy. All the boys have been fed that there is a hierarchy and you go up the hierarchy by embodying these traits. So it gets worse and worse and worse because the situation is never addressed. Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting perspective on like how as a man you have a special role, a perspective in engaging other men, right, to talk about violence against women. Benny, do you have that experience working with male perpetrators? How does it?
I remember this guy look at me very cynically and he said, so I suppose you don't get angry. And I think sometimes we need, when we, as men, talking to other men, say, of course we do get angry. But what do we do with our anger? And I think that there's again this sad association that anger means violence. Anger must result in violence. I can't find any other way of dealing with it. So part of our responsibility as men is really to talk to them about, yes, how do we realistically deal with situations of conflict, situations where we are upset, and yet not erupt in violence. Because, it's very interesting with what Sean you said, that even these young boys wanted to see something good in themselves. I'm setting right society's values, I'm doing something positive. And I think many of the men that I meet who have been convicted of very violent acts also see themselves as, I'm not a wife beater, I really care for my wife, I love my wives. And to some extent, I believe them. But somehow in their expression of their care and concern, they aren't able to translate that to something more positive. So in working with these men, one of the things I find that is important to do is to challenge the man. How can you show her you love her without being violent? How can you show her that you care for her and you can actually protect her? You say you want to protect her, but when you beat her up, does she feel protected? And the answer is pretty obvious.
Right. And you mentioned that a lot of it is about control, right? So do you think it comes from a societal sort of sense that the woman is the man's property? Is there a sense that she, the sense of wanting to control and wanting to put her in a place or manage her, as you
I think that there are both elements. One is the element of entitlement and property and rights over her. But the other element, which is impinging on the man, is that I've got to be in control of my emotions of every situation. And men are very afraid to be vulnerable. So if I don't know what to do in this situation, I start to be very panicky. Why must that be? I enjoy conversations with women who can talk about a situation. They say, I don't know what the answers are, but I'm willing to explore it. For many men, they look at me and say, well, if I don't have the answers, why should I go for counseling? How can a counselor have the answer? So he believes that he should have the answer to every issue in his life, which if you put that on yourself, that's going to drive you around the bend.
So we've talked about how some of the issues are, say, this sense that, the only emotion society allows men to feel is anger, or the sense of entitlement and control and all of that. So how do we, but you are obviously men who have rejected those ideas and have embraced other ways of being men. And how do we encourage, and how do you encourage other men and more men and how do we work with, say, boys and men to change this idea of masculinity, to not associate masculinity with aggression and violence, and allow, this idea that boys can't cry, boys can't do any of this. How do we start to change all of that?
If I may, I'm just taking a leaf out of this idea of the fathering movement, where boys are looking for a sense of identity. And back to Sean's example, it's about the schoolyard pecking order. Everybody wants to be, the top dog, and everybody wants to feel that if I can emulate this person, then I'm a real man. So I think boys, like perhaps women too, are looking for some form of modeling, positive modeling. colleagues to say, you know, son, there are times I messed up. There are times I don't have the answers. But you know, it's not the end of the world. There are times I made mistakes, but it's not the end of the world. I think we live in a society today in Singapore where we feel we need to know all the answers. We need to be in complete control of our lives. But that's not the real world. There's a lot of ambiguity, there's a lot of chaos.
So role modeling
Role modeling, I
vulnerability
think,
and
is very
well, like, you know,
important.
that it's okay to cry or it's
Yeah.
okay to kind of yeah. What do you think, Jolovan?
Well, not reinforcing gender stereotypes definitely is the way to go. So, to follow up on your point about parenting, for instance, I mean, there is a tendency for a lot of parents, for instance, to say things to girls, for instance, oh, that's such a pretty dress. Oh, you look so beautiful and pretty today. Yeah, but we hardly say that to boys, right? Boys tend to be rewarded more for exhibiting masculine characteristics like roughhousing and even when boys get into fights, for instance, right? Some parents say, oh well, he's a boy, so
Or
it's
it's
kind
seen
of
like it's a
expected.
cool thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like you've been to fight. Like
Yeah, that's right. So I think parents being aware of how their parenting styles reinforce certain gender roles is important. But I think as men also, because you will need to be aware that the fact that we are men, we have privilege and are often seen in positions of power. So whenever we talk about issues which affect women, whether it is women's rights, violence against women, etc. It's to be mindful to hear their voices and to stand in solidarity with these women and not necessarily speak for women or always wanting to be the one to dominate the conversation or the discourse, but to be aware that women's voices, especially disempowered women's voices, are heard more. So I can relate to this, especially in my line of work, where I work a lot with domestic workers, and it's often the case that we tend to advocate for domestic workers rather than advocate with domestic workers. And even among the domestic worker volunteers I work with, they often look up to me and say, "Oh, so what is your opinion? What should we do? You know, you are the boss, right? You are the Singaporean, you are the one who's Chinese, you're the one who's male. So we want to listen to you and we want to know what you think."
Yeah.
So the huge challenge in my work is facilitating this process where my power is reduced and goes back into the hands of the domestic workers, so that they eventually are the ones who speak up for themselves, and it's not always me doing it. I will admit it is not easy, and I haven't reached there yet, but it's still a work in progress, and it's something which I think as people, whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, whatever, we need to be aware of the kinds of social privileges that we have, and to critique that, and to ensure that those voices which are marginalized are heard more.
Can you give an example of how you have managed to achieve that in some senses in your work with domestic workers? So, you know, like, right, so, like they represent themselves. What are some examples of
Right, yeah.
where that's changed? Yeah.
Well, what we do now is we organize a lot of capacity building workshops for domestic workers, which are rights-based. So we will talk about what are international labor and human rights standards, and we encourage them to go for conferences and workshops where they can represent the community. So now, for instance, whenever there are opportunities for my organization, Home, to be represented in conferences and all that, I will try as much as I can to ask my domestic workers themselves to go, rather than I go or my colleagues go. But admittedly, that's difficult because they live in a society which still marginalizes them. So for them to even find time to take leave, to go for these kinds of events is difficult, and you need to have a very understanding employer who's willing to do that. So the process of empowering the workers is hampered a lot by not just attitudes of society at large, but even rules and regulations.
Right.
Say, for instance, domestic workers are not migrant workers. For instance, they will find it very scary to organize an event at Hong Lim Park, for instance. if they do that, yeah, they run the risk of losing their employment. Or it might be more difficult for them to be critical of government policies and with the media, yeah, because they're always thinking about whether they will lose their jobs in the process. So there are lots of all these challenges, you see, that we have to contend with. But what I can say is that despite these challenges, we still have to start somewhere. And what Home we have done is we started organizing them through these workshops, these events, building their capacities, also building their confidence. Because they're often socialized into thinking that they shouldn't have a point of view, that they should keep quiet. So these kinds of workshops, these kinds of activities will also help build their self-esteem.
So, you know this dynamic that we've just talked about where, there's men have more power, are more visible in society, have a bigger voice in society, and this is a very particular example, right, of domestic workers are one of the most disenfranchised groups, and how you as a man advocating for them need to balance that power. But in more everyday ways, how do you think men can create more understanding? What can men do to give women back that power in everyday relationships to make sure that they're not taking up too much space making most of the decisions, whether it's in the family, whether it's in the workplace? How do men give women, use the power and position they have to elevate women's status that is rightfully theirs?
I think it's just being able to go against the grain. That's it for me. I think one very brilliant example is that I hang out with my friends and whatnot, and so sometimes they bring their girlfriends home. And so one day this guy and his girlfriend start having this little argument, and the girl says, "You never listen to me. You always cut me off when I speak." Okay, and the guy says, "No, you're imagining." So she talks to me later privately, and she says, "Oh, you work in human rights. You work in women's rights. You understand what I'm talking about." And then she points me towards this study that was done that showed that women, women don't feel that they have the space to speak up. And when they do speak, sometimes they're not taken seriously. And so this caught me quite off guard. I said, how could this be happening in this world that I live in? And so I went to look it up, and I found out it was true. And the results have been replicated many more times. So with this awareness, when I see it happening, I can sort of divert the flow of conversation, not say back to the girl, but to give the woman at least 50%, at least her voice. It's just this little thing. It's so small, just being aware of it, And it makes a world of change. And she comes back to me and says, "Hey, I can see that you actually picked up the study and you learned something,
Yeah, there are some really interesting studies that show, for example, that in a group, whether it's at a workplace or outside of it, when a woman says something, and 5 seconds later, a man says the same thing, that everyone's like, yeah, that's true, and they didn't even hear her say it the first time, or how women are, the number of times women are interrupted when they speak, tend to be, and so, like, how do we help each other, like men, how do men help each other become more conscious of these things, and when could you speak in the context of like in a relationship, how does that play out? How do we encourage more equal relationships that acknowledge boundaries and acknowledge everybody's voice in decision making power?
I think it's also teaching a couple in a relationship how to tune in a little bit more to each other, to understand, to hear. Unfortunately, sometimes when people are in a very unhappy state and they are quarreling, we tend to speak in terms of demands, we tend to speak in terms of ultimatums, you better do this, if not, So sometimes I try to get in terms of a request, and this is my point of view, and all I can do to my partner is just to help you understand where I'm coming from. And, just the listener having the discipline to say, now can I paraphrase what you say? That's so difficult. Because we tend to listen with our preconceived notions and assumptions. But if a couple can learn to hear each other out a little bit more, then you find that the other partner isn't trying to cut you off at the knees, and the other partner isn't trying to put you into a corner. That all she's asking for is for a little bit more understanding, a little bit more support. And if a man can say, well, I listen to me.
Mm.
I'm not asking him to move mountains. I just want him to listen to me.
Mm.
And really, if you replicate that many times over to big societies, that's what we're looking for. How to reduce conflict between communities just by having more understanding and more communication.
Mm. Right.
Such a simplistic view I have of the world.
Right. But as you know, and all of you as men have like peers, women, siblings, fathers. How easy or difficult is it to interrupt or call out when another man who's your peer or a family member is does something sexist, says something derogatory about women, or is being controlling, dominating.
Friends and even family members about how domestic workers should be treated. And it's often difficult to, I mean, trying to change the attitudes and mindsets of fellow friends and family members, I think is the most difficult. I'd rather do it with a group of people who I don't know, because there's a lot of personal, there are a lot of personal feelings and emotions involved, so that often gets very difficult. But I think one way in which you can do it is to talk about it with that person one on one. I find that usually it's more difficult to do these kinds of confrontations, in a big setting where there's a lot of saving of face issues and all that. So I think if we are really concerned about something that has happened, talking to that person, I think individually, privately, usually often helps, and it also communicates the gravity of the situation. Whereas if you do it in a big social setting, people tend to get very defensive, and it becomes more difficult.
I mean, I can't help but agree with that, because here we're trying to confront disrespect. And if we confront it in a disrespectful manner, it kills the message. So I think there's a place to have a very public platform. There's a place to also take the person aside and say, hey, what's going on? Because I know you love your wife, but you treat her very badly. So I think if we spoke this way to the person one on one, it can be very respectful.
Yeah. Right. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think I'd reiterate just the point about how men have that unique role, that they're gifted with that unique ability to be allies, to women, in the sense that from that same study we found also that men take men more seriously. All right, so so I see this as a unique position to be in. If men take you more seriously, then you have been gifted this opportunity to be able to be somebody who could take a message and deliver it to them in a language that they understand. It could be anybody, it could be people that are wrapped up in bro culture, masculinity, things like that. But because you're a man, maybe you have some experience with that, you can tailor your message to be spoken in a way that they understand, that it hits them. So that's the unique role that we have as men.
Yeah. And just one or two more things. This is 2 minutes. But is there how can we talk just very quickly about how masculinity, this the kind of mainstream or dominant ideas of what it is to be a real man, to be tough or aggressive or in some way dominant. How does this hurt some men, do you think? Like men, we always hear about, we know that boys get bullied for being too girly or, being feminine and being called sissy and having their sexuality questioned, being bullied. And, boys face a lot of violence from other boys, right? Whether it's, to being shoved, like a boy would be quicker to shove a boy than say a girl, right? let's say in a school situation. So boy on boy violence also happens, and do you think it's related to the same ideas of masculinity, and how how is that part of the issue?
I think it's a big part of the issue because we are socialized into violence, and violence is a way to resolve issues. Let's take a walk outside and let's settle it in the car park. So there's this mentality, and there's this mentality that if there's if there's anyone that should sacrifice himself, it should be the man. Women and but Costa Concordia, the men ran away first when the sinking ship. But in the past, it was really about women and children first, and men are supposed to sink the ship. It's the men who go to war. It's the men who kind of supposed to protect their country and
Men
honor
to do
country.
NS.
Men are to do NS.
Yeah.
So we are communicating that men are expendable. That if there's anyone that's supposed to be suffering for others, it should be the men. But I think that's also feeds into the macho culture that you should be doing this. But it again socializes us to violence.
Yeah, and we know that, say, whether it's judicial caning in Singapore or even caning in schools, it's only
The
for
boys.
boys and men, right? So men's pain is often minimized, but like you said, it feeds into the very same cycle where men have to be like, yeah, I don't care about pain, and so I can also inflict it on other men or sometimes women. So do you have any final thoughts to share on why men should care about violence against women, and what can they do in their everyday lives to take a stand, to do something about it?
Yeah, I think the question is a little bit sad for me. Why should men care about violence against women? It's such a basic question. That really tugs at what it means to be human. I think every human being should care about violence to another human being. Um, but I think if I really had to go down into it and give the most selfish reason possible, it's because violence is a two-way street. You hurt the opposite party, but the person who is dishing out violence, it's not that he gets away scot-free. Now, studies show that people who are bullies, people who are perpetrators of violence, are more likely to be incarcerated, more likely to turn to alcohol and drugs, more likely to suffer from depression, more likely to have die of suicide. It's a two-way street. So to give the most selfish answer possible, men should care about violence against women because it's going to come back full circle and affect men. Yeah.
I think it's a lot more powerful for men to stand up and say no to violence because statistically, men are the ones who are perpetrators of violence. So, and this is how we stand in solidarity with women and other victims of violence and say that, yes, I'm a man, and even though statistically I am more likely to inflict violence upon someone, but this is something which can be stopped. This is something which we can most certainly tell ourselves not to do. So I think men themselves coming up to say this would be a very powerful message.
I would say all of us should be concerned about violence, whether be it a victim, a perpetrator. I think the reasons I'm in full agreement, but this is this is our core humanity. How can we claim we're humans when we don't treat each other humanely? How can we say we are humans when we don't display qualities that speaks of our humanity? If I'm constantly violent, then at some stage I lose my humanity. What defines me as human?
Right.
And I want to add something about violence because we often think about violence as physical and sexual violence, but there's also psychological violence, verbal abuses. And I think this is something which we need to think about as well. I see, for instance, in my work, a lot of domestic workers who are often victims of this kind of verbal harassment, insults, demeaning remarks made about their appearances, made about their bodies, made about their background, the country that they come from, their income level. So I think we need to be aware of the kinds of biases that we have, whether it's class, gender, and be sensitive in the way we conduct ourselves, especially in the words that we use, because some domestic workers tell me they find that usually verbal abusers, it's even more painful for them than physical abuse
Yes.
because it really hits right into their hearts and and it causes them a lot of stress. And there have been instances where domestic workers have confided in me that they have felt like committing suicide because of the stress that they feel, the mental anguish that they experience while working in the household.
Great. Thank you all very much for being here today and talking to us. And really, this campaign, the White Ribbon campaign to us is about highlighting how men are role models of anti-violence and role models to other younger men and boys of different ways of being men, and that being a man is associated not with violence and aggression and toughness, but with care and respect for the safety of everyone around us, including women and girls. And I think that this is a really important and different conversation to have, because a lot of the times, we focus on what people can do to protect themselves from violence, right? So what can women do to make sure they don't get sexually assaulted? What can domestic workers do to make sure they don't provoke their employers? What can women do to not provoke their husbands? And I think shifting the conversation to the responsibility on us to not perpetrate violence, right? And how we can change a culture that tolerates that. And so I found this extremely inspiring and enlightening. So thank you so much.